Welcome to the podcast of the Wizarding School for Composers. My name is Dr. Joseph Soa, and as a composer and educator, I have seen firsthand how transformative the right tools and ideas can be for creative growth. Join us each week as we demystify the craft of composition with expert guests and explore new approaches to enhance your creativity, productivity, and joy. Whether you're a seasoned composer or just starting out, this is the show for you. My guest today is Dr. Garrett Hope. Garrett is a speaker, coach, and composer who works with highly driven individuals, teams, and organizations to improve their relationship with money. He does that by helping them release their money anchors and turn their relationship with money into a helpful one. Garrett, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Joseph. Happy to be here.
Thanks. It's so great to see you. I find that this whole question of money anchors is really fascinating. You know, money is a question just as people in general in a society, we need to talk about money. And particularly as composers, there's so many different money anchors that we find ourselves running into on like the personal end of things such as, asking people for money is scary and am I worth what I'm charging? And then you often find with composers too, they get philosophical with things like, maybe on more of a theological end, they say that money is the root of evil, or they say that, more on a political end, capitalism is destroying art and seeking a career is making you complicit. Not to just go like whole hog on it, but you hear these kinds of things, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so to really frame this though, I want to start our discussion about money anchors, just framing it in a simple idea that I think will be helpful as we continue on. And this idea is thinking about a career in composing on a scale from a struggling composer to a thriving composer. And what does that look like and how do we differentiate them? And of course, we're eventually going to get to what are the anchors that are holding back a struggling composer and how can a struggling composer release those to become thriving? So let me explain this idea a little bit more. And then I promise I have a question for you at the end of this.
Okay.
So when I'm thinking of a thriving composer, I'm thinking of someone who is artistically fulfilled in what they're doing. They're writing fluently. They're working on meaningful projects. They're financially stable. They have a collection of collaborators and patrons that they love to work with and that help finance their work. And conversely, when I'm thinking of a struggling composer, I'm thinking of someone who tends to be artistically frustrated. Maybe they have issues with writer's block. Maybe they're in a financially precarious situation. But very often they just don't have the kinds of connections that they would need to lead to meaningful projects and finances. And, most of us as composers are probably somewhere in the middle of this. And so here now is the question. You've interviewed hundreds of composers on your podcast, The Portfolio Composer. You know a bunch of composers. I'm really curious, just to start out, what have you noticed differentiates thriving composers from struggling ones?
What a great question, Joseph. We're just going to go out of the gate swinging, aren't we? So the first thought that came to my mind was that, I'm going to take a step back. And I want to talk about what it means to be successful and how that can become an anchor in itself. And we often define success based on what we see other people doing, or some sort of benchmark that's external to ourselves. Like I have to have X amount of money in the bank account, or I have to have X amount of performances, or I have to have had this degree from that school and studied with that particular person. And all of those are kind of false flags in terms of determining success. And I know I'm guilty of believing those at times, and it's easy to fall back into it. I'm sure that you would agree with that. So I think the first thing I want to say is that you have to have a realistic and healthy idea of what success means. And like you said, I have interviewed hundreds of composers. I know many hundreds of composers. And there are people that certain aspects of their lives are worth emulating. But I've spoken with composers who have made huge careers in film and video game industry or the concert world, but their personal lives are a shambles. Like they can't hold a relationship together, or they don't have a relationship with their kids. And I value those extra musical things so much that to me, my definition of success incorporates that. Like, do I have a healthy family life? And am I also artistically fulfilled? And am I using the skills that I have been given and that I have worked very hard to hone. So I want to just say that we need to have a realistic idea of what success means first.
Yeah. I love that. I think that that's so important. And I love that you bring in this idea of, having a healthy family or personal life in addition to your career. Because if you don't have that, what do you have? At least in my mind.
I'm not sure at least for me, it's not worth it to, get hundreds of performances a year or maybe get a big ASCAP check, but then suffer through a divorce. Like I don't want to live that life. I don't want to be that person.
Sure. Well, and of course, the dream is, we should mention as well that these things aren't mutually exclusive either. That could potentially be an anchor as well.
Yes. And then I want to let's just park that idea of the conversation about what success is, and we can come back to it if you wish. But to really answer your question, the thing that I have seen the most, probably in all of the conversations I've had, is that people who are successful take action. They do. They, despite whatever fear or anxiety they have about reaching out, investing in their business, investing in themselves, investing in their craft, they do the thing. I interviewed one guy who, I can't remember his name right now, film composer, who one of his first breakthroughs was because he went to South by Southwest and he was watching a film screening, and Charlize Theron came into the room to watch the screening. And he literally climbed up over the balcony to get into her box to start a conversation with her. And of course, he gets they remove him from the theater. But that opened up new doors so that he could start working on her projects. Wow. Sometimes you have to be really bold. You have to send 100 emails to get the one yes, and then you get 99 no's. And that can be very discouraging, but there's this, not just a drive, there is a drive, but there's the ability to look past whatever anxiety and frustration and worry stops you from doing that. So I would say an overwhelming sign or characteristic of successful composers is that they do. And we often can read a lot. We watch a lot of YouTube videos. We listen to podcasts. We read books. We might manifest and meditate and visualize and all that stuff. But unless you're doing, none of that's going to matter. And I would like to offer a kind of a reframe on where I thought you were going when you set up the question, and about how to think about everything you're doing. And I actually got this from a friend who's a retired IRS special agent. Like, this is a guy who would go in and audit businesses, and his favorite thing to do was to go through cash-based businesses like bars, musicians, and find people who are cheating the law. But his concept was, your life or your career, let's say career, is a 2-cylinder engine. And the first cylinder is what it is you do. And you have to do what you're doing to the best of your ability at the top of your game. And that's what the wizarding school does, right? Like, you want to compose. Well, compose with freedom, compose well. There's craft that can be practiced and learned. And there's a discipline. All that is the first cylinder. Mm-hmm. But to get the career really humming, you have to have both cylinders running, right? Firing on all cylinders. And the other cylinder is the business aspect. So the money related stuff. You have to know how to do your accounting, or you have to have accounting done. You have to know how much you owe, how much people owe you, and how much money you have available, what resources are taking place. And if both of those are working right, your career will hum. If you're writing what you're doing really well, if you're doing that really well, and then if you have the business side mastered, things work really well together. And what I have found, and where I'm doing now, this transition that you described of helping people with their relationship with money, is people don't even want to look at that second cylinder. Why? Why are you anxious to open up your bank account statement? What feelings happen to you when you look at the bottom line? Why is it that you don't even know how much money is flowing through your business or through your account on a monthly basis? And my IRS agent friend says that he works with people who are completely cash poor, and they have these same problems as people who are millionaires. And right now, He's doing some accounting work for a firm since he retired from the IRS, and he's got millionaires who are bringing him shoeboxes of receipts.
Wow.
And they literally don't know how much money is available to them, how much they owe and how much is owed to them. So this is not about how much money you make. Everyone on the spectrum has these issues. And so it's this relationship to money where we let money run the ship. And that gets in our way of making that second cylinder hum.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that metaphor. I think it's a great way of describing it, just because, particularly when we go to school as composers, we go to school to learn all the musical stuff. And I think that that's generally a good thing. We need to have those skills and techniques if we're going to thrive. But either implicitly or just due to our upbringing or just whatever reason we bring into it, there's this sense of, we don't talk about the money stuff. Either it doesn't matter or it's scary or for whatever the reason, we don't talk about it. And so that's really setting us up for being in this one cylinder situation, kind of like what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You and I both know many very gifted composers who write incredible music, but nothing's happening for them career-wise. They're probably frustrated. And a lot of that is because the second cylinder isn't running the way it should run.
Yeah. Well, let's focus in on that. So just to sort of sum up where we've been and where we're going, right? So thriving, struggling, the main differentiator from what you've seen is taking action. And I think that that's just so powerful. You need to take action. If you don't take action and do the scary thing, you're going to be stuck. But one of the big actions that I'm hearing that we need to take as composers is we need to open up the black box of money and start looking inside it, start taking notice of those sorts of things. So this actually, I wasn't going to ask this question, but this is the question that occurs to me is, what are the basic things with money every composer should do? I'm thinking of something like you should have a rainy day fund or stuff like that. Are there things that when you're coaching composers, you're surprised that they just don't have these basic money steps in order?
Sure. And I will answer that question, but I want to be clear that I don't do financial advising. So I'm not in the work that I do with people. I'm not helping them set up all their accounts or figure out how to allocate their retirement investments and all that stuff. But in general, you should have a separate account from which you do all business activities. And it is best to completely separate and wall off your personal finances from your business. One of the ways that helps to do that is to set up a legal entity like an LLC or an S Corp. And if you can keep all that accounting separate and you don't treat your business like a piggy bank, instead you pay yourself out of it. You don't buy your groceries from that account. You don't go to the theater on it or whatever, unless it's a legit business expense. Then all of that, first off, is the first thing you should do to separate your money. And the legal term is that's a corporate veil. And if you were to have your business taken to court for whatever reason, and God forbid, let's not, but let's say you you cause a car accident and they're going after you and they want all your funds. If they can prove that you've used your business as a personal piggy bank, they can pierce the corporate veil and go after that money. But if you've kept that separate, and because it's a separate legal entity, that is no longer liable for that accident. So the first thing I would say is you need to separate your finances. And then you need to start thinking about, how is money helpful? Money is reflective, not causative. And we often reverse that and we say money is at fault for whatever situation or circumstance I find myself in. But really all money does is it shows what's happening. It doesn't cause anything to happen.
Interesting. So maybe let's get a little bit more concrete about this. So I'm a composer. I write a piece of music and I get commissioned for a piece of music. We can even be concrete. I am just finishing up a saxophone choir piece that's going to be played at the Midwest Clinic, and they're going to be paying me for that piece. So where would the money be causative as opposed to that other word that you said in this exchange that happened?
Reflective?
Reflective, yeah.
Okay, so the money is never causative. Money is always reflective.
Oh, you're right.
And so what happens with composers is we'll say, because I don't have plenty in my bank account, then I can't do this thing. Like, it's money's fault that I cannot get my ticket to go to the conference. It's money's fault that I can't upgrade my computer. Money is just a tool, and it reflects what's already there. One of the ways that it reflects what's happening is in our emotional response to it, or even in how a person is as an individual. If you're a greedy person, it doesn't matter if you have no money or tons of money. All money does is give you more opportunity to be more of that thing. So if you're already greedy and you have more money, you'll just continue being greedy. Generous people, whether you have little or a lot, are generous. I have a good friend who's close to retirement, and we went out to lunch recently, and he confessed to me that what makes him most sad about retiring is that his retirement income will be less. And that makes him sad because what he likes to do with his money is to take people out to lunch, to spend time with them. He's a generous person. So it doesn't matter how much he has. What he wants to do is to bless others with it. That's one way money is reflective and not causative. Also, money tells you what's happening. So you can look at your bank account and it will just say, this is how much there is. That's just a statement. It's an objective fact. There is X amount in your account. You spent Y amount on this and A amount on that and B amount on that. All it does is inform you. But we often emotionalize what's happening and we make money the culprit and we want to blame it for our circumstances when often it was our choices that led to these circumstances. So in terms of your commission, congratulations, by the way. I look forward to listening to that.
Thank you.
Like, the money part came in when you negotiated the commission fee, right? And so it's reflecting the relationship you build, their perception of value in what you're writing and how you're contributing to their ensemble and their concert. And then there's going to be more money pieces as you sell the score, as hopefully you get royalty money from performances. And all of that will just show you that the score was sold and it was performed, right? It's just reflective of a circumstance. It's not causing anything to happen.
So it's just reflecting that those things are happening. So if it were, again, to help me and to help our listeners understand what would be the causative way of looking at this commission and why is that causative way not quite accurate? Or how would you reframe it in those terms? Again, just this is not accurate.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, they will place, and this goes back to our discussion about how you determine what is successful. They will determine how well their career is going based on that, say, that commission number. And there are many, many reasons why a commission rate can be high or low. And there are things that we can do, and I know that you help your students do this, move towards raising your rates, which is what we want to do as we grow our career. But that number is not a reflection of how good a composer you are, nor is it a reflection of how far along in your career you are. I know highly accomplished composers who are, in my mind, very successful, who will sometimes accept a very low commission rate because they're just really excited about the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of other composers look at that and say, oh man, well, I didn't get what I was asking for. I must not be good. So they're letting money run the ship, right? They're making money causative.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I can see that. This actually reminds me. So a mutual friend of ours, Alex Gardner, she just posted earlier today on Facebook. Much of my professional development work with composers revolves around helping them ask for what they want. This is very scary for most people, especially regarding finances. And I was wondering if I could hear your take on that.
Well, I think Alex is right.
Yeah.
It is scary because we don't want to look at it. And our culture as a whole doesn't do a good job of looking at it. And the kind of framework I've used, the hook, is to take the idea of anchors. And this is the best way I can explain it right now, Joseph. So I hope that this helps. Anchors show up. Well, first of all, let's say an anchor is designed to be helpful. Like from a sailing and boat perspective, anchors are designed to keep the boat safe. They keep it from going adrift or going into the rocks at night. And we use anchors in our lives in the same way. Some of these we've adopted from our culture, like common sayings, like we probably heard our parents say, money doesn't grow on trees. Or do you think I'm made of money, or a misappropriation and misquotation from the Bible. It says money's the root of all evil. All these kinds of things become anchors because we start believing them and letting that run our thinking process. Sometimes they're created as a defensive mechanism. So when I finished my master's degree, long time ago, out of the blue, all of a sudden, my dad called me and read me the riot act about how now I have a master's degree and I should be able to provide for my family and I need to be able to get a job that's going to cover all my expenses, and literally made me feel awful. And I'm like, Dad, my master's degree is in theory and composition. It's not like I have an MBA and can go and get a 6-figure job right away. Like that wasn't going to happen. And what that did is it created this anchor, this way of thinking in my mind about, oh my gosh, I'm a failure if I can't provide. I'm a failure as a composer because I don't make enough money, whatever enough is, which is a weird moving target. And so I think what Alex is hinting at is that kind of thinking. It's really hard. We go into our careers with all of this stuff, these anchors, and a lot of them are just dropped into the bottom of the ocean. And no matter if the winds are for us or not, they prevent us from moving to where we go because the anchor is doing its job and keeping the ship safe. And this is all related to your inner critic, that voice that tells you can't or you shouldn't or why. And it asks all these questions. It's challenging you. It wants to keep you safe, but it can often get in our way and prevent us from doing that next thing, from going to where we want to go. Is this resonating? Is it making sense?
Yeah, no, and honestly, I think the thing that is really resonating with me right now is this idea that these anchors, their goal is to keep us safe.
Yes.
And so for me, like when I'm thinking about how are we developing our career as composers, it's so easy to get frustrated with yourself. And so if you recognize that, these anchors that I have, the things that are holding me back, their purpose is to keep me safe. It's misguided, but that's their purpose. I think to my mind, it helps me be a little bit more patient with myself as I'm working to remove those anchors and then re-anchor them in healthy places.
Yes. So 2 thoughts. The first is I want to tell another story about how anchors come into our lives even though we don't necessarily want it to. And this is to show that we often create these anchors when we're very young and we're not even aware that they exist, which will lead me to my second point in a minute. But one of my mentors had a client who just couldn't break through a money ceiling. If you're familiar with Gay Hendrix's work in The Big Leap, he has this idea of kind of the ceiling that you hit. And for money, that happens a lot. So what would happen is this guy would have the opportunity for work promotions or to increase sales, whatever it would be, and he would sabotage himself. He would find ways to not get it or to not quite meet those performance expectations. And what he discovered through conversation with his coach was when he was little, his dad had a factory job and his dad got paid in cash every week. And so this was like early in the 20th century, right? So this is a long time ago. But his dad would come home on Fridays with the pay envelope and he'd give some cash to the mom so she could pay the rent and the groceries, whatever. And then this dad would go to the pub and get completely smashed. And so then he'd come home late and he's drunk and there would be a fight and there would be physical and emotional abuse. And this little kid is watching this. He's 4 years old, 5 years old. And when you're little, it's your parents are your guiding light. And they often, they can't do wrong. When you're really little, you haven't learned that your parents are fallible too. And so he's looking at all this that's happening. And the only other ingredient he found in this mix of things was money. So the story that this little kid started telling himself was that money ruins families. So as a little kid, he drops this anchor and now he's 40, 45 years old. He's trying to get to that next stage in his career. He's married, he's got his kids, and he loves his wife and his family, and he doesn't want to do anything to hurt them or abuse them. And so when he has the opportunity to increase his income, that anchor is still functioning. And it's telling him this story that if he gets more money, it's going to ruin his family. So that's one way these happen. And my second point is that all of this occurs in our unconscious. And you all, I'm sure you're familiar with the iceberg example, right? That in your mind, in your conscious thinking, it's like the top 5-10% is all that we're actually aware of. And there's all these thought processes that happen underneath the surface of the water in our iceberg metaphor. And that's where the anchors are. And what I'm trying to help people do is to find those anchors and change that relationship, change the story so that money can become helpful. As you said in your introduction, money can be helpful. Money allows you to have a food in your fridge and a roof over your head and gas in your car and the ability to upgrade your equipment when you need to as a composer. It's a very helpful thing.
Yeah, well, and even going further, like, I mean, money enables you to take people out to lunch, enables you to hire people, and there's lots of other ways that you can continue to literally pay it forward when you have money.
Yeah, I hire people all the time, even if it's just gig work, but I'm still hiring people. I am contributing back, and I want the money to flow through me. In fact, this brings up another anchor that I see a lot in creative individuals, is this idea that I've got to hold on to it and I have to stop it. Now, this might sound a little woo-woo, but there's some real correlations here. I mean, what do we call money? Like, one of the words for it is currency, and a current flows. And if a stream is flowing and you dam it up, what happens, Joseph?
It stops moving.
It stops. We used to go camping in Colorado a lot when we were there. And one of our favorite camping spots was where there were these beaver dams. And it was really fun to watch the animals. But if you are familiar with beaver ponds, they become quite stagnant over time. They fill with sediment and it completely changes the landscape, but nothing's flowing out. Well, if you do that with your money and things become stagnant, sometimes we dam it up on the front and we say, like, when we're afraid to charge our rates, or when we're afraid that might sell out if I become successful, which is, you brought up that idea, like, oh, you're just complicit in the capitalist system. Well, okay, so if you don't accept the money, what's going to happen? Now there's going to be no outflow and you can't pay your bills. So you want to let this flow. Now you do it wisely, right? Like, you look at your money and you see, well, how much is available and what can I do? But I think the point we're making here is that we help create this economy and we drive the economy by hiring others, creating opportunities. I hire musicians to play at my church. I book venues. I bring people in for special events. We just brought in a guy from LA and paid him a couple $1,000s to do a workshop. These are all the things that we do as creatives. But often we want to dam up that flow. It's like, oh, the money's in. I got to hold on to it. Can't spend any money. Well, maybe you need to invest in your craft, get that first cylinder running. Or maybe you need to invest in your business. Have you set up an LLC? Have you set up special bank accounts? Maybe you need to hire an accountant if you really don't like looking at numbers and balancing your books. And that's not very expensive, but it will all help the things run better in the end.
Yeah. Well, what this is reminding me of is I've heard a metaphor about cash flow once, where just thinking about it like it's a sink, right? So you have money that's flowing in, and then you have money that's flowing out. And then as long as what's flowing in is greater than what's flowing out, you're good to go.
You're good to go.
That's what you need. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, like, that metaphor breaks down at some point because the sink overflows. But when we stop the flow, that's a sign that our anchors are getting in the way. And I've done this. Like, when there are months and seasons of life when things are tight, I get tight. And then I get tight with my money, so I can feel it in my chest, like I have physical responses. And then I hesitate to do things like to take people out to bless them. Like, even if it's just for coffee, it costs $5. But I'm like, oh man, I'm not sure I should do that this month. And that tightness kind of amplifies in all the areas of my life. And I find then that the new gigs, the new opportunities coming in are diminished, and they're equally tight and frustrating. But when I have a relationship with money where money's helpful and I can say, oh, I've got plenty this month. Or even if I don't have plenty, the attitude is I don't have plenty, which is a different feeling from I don't have enough. And that allows me to make better choices. And then new opportunities come. And it's weird, Joseph. I'm not like a law of attraction person. I'm really not. But there is something to it. And I have a current client right now who is building some amazing things in her career as a composer and a teacher. And we were talking about how these opportunities were coming out of the blue all of a sudden. And the idea is that she's putting energy in the system and she's letting all of this flow. And when you put energy into the system puts energy back. And the system is her business. She has focused on Who am I serving? How can I offer them something of value? And then the money piece, she's looking at it and aware of it. And now she's getting calls out of the blue to do stuff. And she just booked a gig at a school, like a 2-day thing where they're paying $400 a day just to come in. It's a school in her neighborhood.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So she's going to make an extra 800 books, and then they're going to buy her 800 bucks, and then they're going to buy her books, which are published too. So it's win-win. But that wouldn't have happened. Let me rephrase that. It might not have happened if she wasn't open to the possibility, and she was open to the possibility because she put money in the system and she wasn't being tight with everything.
Yeah. So this leads to my next question. So we have these anchors. We've mentioned several of them in passing, but you've also mentioned that these anchors tend to be like part of the iceberg that's underneath the ocean. How do you help composers find these anchors? What if, someone's at home listening to this, what would you suggest as an exercise of, let's surface some of your money anchors so you can start to deal with it?
Well, one of the first things I do with clients is to start paying attention to the language we use around money. So how do you talk about it? And you may find once you start paying attention that you use a lot of negative framing around money. And our language creates our reality. And that's true whether it's about money or relationships or music or whatever. But the way we talk about something absolutely impacts how we experience it. And if we have time, I can tell a story about that. But the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the language around it, especially the word enough. Enough is very heavy and oppressive. And I try to help clients eliminate that word and switch it to something that brings a little bit more hope and optimism, like plenty. Either I have plenty or I do not have plenty. Feels very different from I have more than enough and I don't have enough. And enough is always a moving target anyway. What is enough? How will you know you have enough? So we look at that, and we have to look at behaviors. How do you act with money? How do you act when your bank statement comes? How does it feel when you open up your banking app to look at your number? And then we can start digging into that. And we find these stories, and they're often around words that we're telling ourselves, these anchors. And we ask, well, is that true? So a common anchor where we will blame money and we make money the fault is the idea that rich people are mean, right? And here we are as musicians, and we want to have a concert. And now we have to ask people who have money to help us. Either give us grants, be a sponsor, or buy a ticket, right? But we have this story that says that if they have money, they've stolen it, or they've cheated, or they've lied, or they're just not good people. So the first question is to ask of that story, well, is it true? And the likely answer, probably what, Joseph?
You have no idea if it's true or not,
Probably not. I mean, are there people who have lied, cheated, and stealed to riches? Absolutely. But I would venture to say that there are more people who have not, who are generous and kind and want to be there to support you, right? So then you can start to examine, well, where did this story come from? And how is it serving you? Well, remember, anchors keep us safe. So we've used these stories as a way to benefit us in some way. And that anchor I created when my dad read me the riot act about having a master's degree and not making money, that kept me safe, or at least my inner critic used it to keep me safe by preventing me from taking risky chances. When I had the opportunity to do X, Y, or Z opportunity, I would look at it and say, oh, that's way too risky. I have to make sure that I'm doing these other things first. And so it prevents us. It served me by keeping me safe, but it also, at the same time, prevented me from taking steps that would have grown my career, would have worked on that second cylinder, and sometimes even the first cylinder. And then you just have to be honest and say, what would it look like if I didn't tell this story? What if I changed the story?
This actually reminds me of another question I wanted to ask you too, is taking risks or things that seem like risks, right? In order to advance your career, to move things forward. This actually leads me to, one of the anchors that a lot of composers have is, I have just put all of this money into my music degree. Why would I hire a coach or someone to help me? Like I've already put this money in. And, both of us have hired coaches. And so I could come up with answers. You could come up with answers. So I'd be curious from your perspective of the coaches that you've worked with. How has that been helpful for you? How did going through that process particularly help you overcome your anchor of, man, I have all this debt. What do I do about it?
I've had multiple coaches. And the first coach I hired because I felt like I should. And this guy really pushed me hard and asked hard questions, but I wasn't at a place where I was ready to change. And it wasn't his fault. It was me that was the problem. But through my relationship with multiple coaches who kept pointing out to me my bad thinking, I was finally able to accept the fact that a lot of my problems were because of me. And then I could start to work on changing the stories and getting new results in my life. And my favorite definition of what a coach is comes from coactive coaching, that style of thinking. And it's that a coach deepens the learning and furthers the action. So a good coach comes alongside, helps you understand what's happening, maybe even helps you figure out where and how to learn what you need to know, but then holds your feet to the fire to take the next step. And a coach is different from a consultant. A consultant comes in and says, okay, I'm going to evaluate where you're at and I'm just going to tell you what to do. Here's the steps. Do it in this order. Businesses will hire consultants to figure out problems in their systems. Executives and other teams will hire coaches to help them figure out for themselves what to do next. And when I've been working with composers, they often want consultants. They want the answer. And this comes back to the way we teach music too. Like there really is a right way or a definitely better way to make music, especially when you're talking about technique, analysis, stuff like that. And they want to know, just tell me what to do. And it's a hard conversation to say, if I just tell you what to do, I'm going to disempower you and you're not going to figure it out. And I'm not interested in creating a dependent relationship with you. And creatives have such crazy money anchors, and there's such a poverty mindset that's related to the artistic way of thinking. And I think because so many creatives are very empathetic people and our heart bleeds for others, and we make art because it moves and changes the world. We don't have that mindset of the people in the school of business, right? We just don't think that way. And so it's hard for us to wrap our heads around the fact that money can actually be helpful. You were a speaker at our last Ultimate Music Business Summit, which we hope to do again in the future. But a regular ticket, which allowed you to watch any presentation, was $37. And Joseph, I kid you not, we had people who wanted a payment plan on $37.
That's amazing.
And I'm like, you're kidding, right? Like you should be able to make that up in 1.5 hour lesson.
You should be able to make it up, like depending on where you live, you should be able to pay multiple tickets, like
right. And the VIP ticket was $200, which allowed you to go to all of the Q&A sessions and get access to the recordings and all that other stuff. And people, there's such a poverty mindset about, and this is the investing in the second cylinder part, right? So for a $200 investment, could you have magnified that or at least broken even by something you learned? Heck yeah. One attendee ended up finally having the courage and figured out how to craft his business so that he could quit his job that he hated. Another attendee was able to grow her piano teaching studio from like 12 students to 45 now, taking the information she learned. Absolutely worth $200.
Totally.
But people will look at that $200 number and that's all they see is $200. And they're like, what am I going to do? I can't do it. I'm freaking out. And that mindset is all wrapped up around these money anchors. We could add 2 more zeros to that. And that's how much some of these high-end consultants or coaches are charging, Fortune 500 companies. And some of them are freaking out too. But the difference is that the reason that they're a Fortune 500 CEO is because they know that there's value in that self-investment and in digging into what is preventing me from getting the second cylinder running, whether it's personally or in my business or within my team, right? And I'm not telling people to spend money unwisely, to spend money they don't have, or to spend on credit. You shouldn't do that. I would never advocate anyone go into debt. But if you're afraid to invest into that second cylinder, you're stopping the flow. Like a lot of the work you do is that first cylinder stuff. And you see this yourself, right? Like here's people, well, I just got my master's in composition. Why would I go to the wizarding school? And you can honestly say, because you're thinking about music in a way that's not going to help you get performances. You're thinking about music in such a way that you're not writing with freedom. It's not flowing. I can help you do that.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I just spent 17 grand for this last year in school. So I'm not going to, or whatever the number might be. Yeah. I'm trying to hit at it by telling stories, but am I answering your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I think that I know that these stories are resonating for me, and I hope that they resonate for our listeners as well, just because this is really just getting at the heart of, what is it that you want to do with your life? Like you have one life. It'd be great if we had multiple, but we have one. I mean, most of us think we have one life. What do you do with it? How do you make the most of it? It reminds me of, I'm reading All It Takes Is a Goal by John Acuff right now. I don't know if you know him.
I know him, but I haven't read the book.
Yeah, book's really great. And one of the premises of the book that he's talking about is, do you feel like you're living up to your potential? Whatever that means. How do we live up to like what it is that we're capable of in life? And the challenge is that when we have these anchors in place, it's so easy not to live up to our potential because, the goal of our anchors isn't to help us live up to our potential, it's to help us be safe. And so if we want to have the kind of impact that we want, if we want to have the kind of relationships that we want in life, if we want to, create the kind of art that we hope for, any dimension that we think about when we're thinking about our career as a composer, what it affects, then I think that this concept of, well, how do we re-anchor ourselves in empowering ideas and in empowering feelings is just so crucial.
Yeah, it really is. It's changing the stories we tell ourselves. And I really love the word relationship around this. And as a coach, I focus on the relationship with money, but what is your relationship to the process of writing music, right? Do you tell yourself a story that it's hard? Or I will never be as good as Joseph Soa?
I hope they don't tell themselves that.
You never know. Yeah, and that makes it really hard to write music if that's your story, right? So that anger is serving you in some way. You're getting some emotional benefit from it, but it's preventing you from doing what you want to do. Whereas a new story might be, I love to write music. I love the challenge of solving problems of form and orchestration. I love connecting my disparate ideas through transitions. Most people hate writing transitions. Most people hate figuring out the form. And when you change the way you talk about it, well, now it's like, whoa, okay, what if I did love it? What if I came to music every day? Like, I'm so excited to be here. I get to wake up every day and I get to write music. That completely reframes it. And it just it energizes me. Even as I say that, I'm like, oh man, I kind of want to get off this call and go back to that score I was working on. And so how we tell ourselves this relationship with money, relationship with music, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Maybe I could tell that story that I hinted at earlier, but how words create your reality. And this has to do with my relationship with my spouse. So when we were newly weds, and we've been married, I have to do some math here, but 24 years. My wife was working as a children's minister, and she was part of a team of women who were running this children's program at a mega church. It was a really big church. And all these women were older, and they were all incredible women, and they became mentors and friends. But what happened is in their conversations, these women would talk badly about their husbands. Like in their frustrations, and this is normal. I'm not trying to diminish these women, but they would talk negatively about their spouses. And what my wife realized is that she was starting to adopt those negative feelings towards these men, even though nothing had happened between her and them. And my wife and I made a commitment to never speak badly about the other in front of other people. So from the very beginning, whether I was hanging out with my friends, doing guy stuff or whatever, and she was with her girlfriends, we would only speak about positive things. And what quickly happened is we built this new reality. When all the words I'm using when I'm talking to other people is how much I love my wife, or how she's done this great thing, or how amazing she is, or how she did this and that, and how proud I am of her, what grows in my heart is more of that, right? I literally created more attraction and love for my spouse by using these words. Now, this is different from when you're talking to a trusted advisor or friend and you have a problem and you need advice. That is also of value. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when all the guys get together and they just want to, men will joke negatively about someone as a way to build camaraderie or to just kind of be funny or to make connection, but we end up always disparaging someone. And I have seen this so often with groups of men, and I can't speak about girl conversations because I'm not one. But what happens is we often will pick on our girlfriends and our spouses or our daughters or our sons, people that are really important to us. And if we use that kind of language, then we end up creating more of that in our life. So this literally shaped my relationship with this person. Let's take that now to money. If we're talking about money as always having lack, of never having enough, of being hard to get, or that it's associated with behaviors you don't like, such as mean people, greedy people are rich. In order for me to have some money, somebody else has to have less, which is this idea of a fixed pie kind of thing, which I don't agree with. What you create is more thinking around that, and your reality becomes that. And it's really hard then to break out of it. And this is why those anchors are so deep in the iceberg.
Yeah. And then you go and you start and you try and have your career and you're just like, man, why is no one interested in my music? Why do I struggle to ask for commissions? Why do I do this? And it's because all these things are sitting around in the background.
Yeah. Now, I can't guarantee that you're going to get commissions, but I can guarantee you're going to feel a whole lot better about things. And you'll probably find ways to create new opportunities if you can think about what you're doing, get that second cylinder running right.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Garrett. I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot. I've had a great opportunity to reflect on my own anchors, and I hope that our listeners have as well. Do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
If you're listening to this, you're probably on the way to getting both cylinders running already. And I encourage you to reach out to Joseph and get that first cylinder going as smoothly as you can. If you want to have a conversation with me, I'd love to set up just a talk and we can see how I can help you. No obligation. And on my website, garretthope.com, I actually have a quiz so you can take that might help point out some anchors that could be existing in your life, which you're free to go and explore and take that. But if I were going to give one piece of advice, it would be do the thing you're afraid of doing. And whatever it is that you're afraid of doing is probably an anchor or thought process living in your life. Whether it's to send that email, to make the phone call, to write the piece, or go back to school, whatever it may be, do that hard thing. And I would challenge you because what's the worst that can happen? Probably nothing. Like, so you send the email, maybe they don't respond. Is that the end of the world? No. What if they say no to whatever it is you're asking? So what? As one of my coaches used to say, no one's dying, no one's getting pregnant, no bad things are happening. You just asked a question about creating an opportunity. Would you like to participate in my consortium? Would you like to buy my score for your band? Would you like to join me in this new project I'm doing? Whatever it is that you're doing, they say no. So what? But why are you not doing it? Because you're afraid on some level.
Yeah. And if we had more time, we'd talk about why it is that you're afraid on those things.
Yeah.
But if you are interested in having that continued conversation, definitely reach out to Garrett and, who has been giving this a lot of thought and helping composers achieve the wins they want to have in their lives. Which leads me to my last question. You already mentioned us a little bit about that quiz on your website. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Through the contact page on my website is probably the best. GarrettHope.com, 2 R's, 2 T's. I have really stopped using social media for the most part. I find it extremely discouraging. It brings up new anchors in me. So it's like, you know what? I have a healthier mindset and I have much more freedom in my life to create and be abundant when I'm not on social media. So I'm really stopped using those channels. So my website and email is the best way to do that.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Garrett. It's been a pleasure to have you.
It's been fun, Joseph. It's been nice to talk to you. It's been a while.
Likewise.